Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Unchurned. I'm your host, Josh Schachter, founder and CEO of UpdateAI. And joining me on today's episode, I have a very special guest. She is the best-selling author and the former chief storytelling officer of Success Magazine. Her work and research teaches individuals and brands to harness and leverage the power of stories. I read her first book, Stories That Stick. Sherry, if you're out there listening, thank you for recommending that book to me. It was a great read. And it debuted at number 2 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. Lots of other accolades. We've got Seth Godin on the cover, commenting on how wonderful of and productive of a read it was. And it really was very helpful. It has been helpful for me. And I'm going to share an example of that. So in any case, I'd like to welcome Kindra Hall to our show. Kindra, thank you so much for being on this episode.
Josh, I'm really glad to be here with you. And I also want to say thank you to Sherry too. Thanks for passing the book on. That's the greatest thing an author can hear. So thanks, Sherry.
There you go. Shout out to Sherry. So let's get started. Warm up the conversation. A couple of quick questions for you. I'd like to know, Kindra, where you're from and where do you live now? I obviously know where you live now. We've talked a lot about this, but for everybody out there listening.
Yep. So I always say I have 3 chapters to my life. So I grew up in rural Minnesota. So I was born and raised in Minnesota, stayed there through college. Then, it was Minnesota. It was really cold. So I moved to New Mexico and then Phoenix. And I was there for about 15 years. And now I am in New York City.
Wow. All very, very different types of environments. That's makes you very well-rounded. Very cool. And I joked about where do you live now because you and I are neighbors. I think we live 2 to 3 blocks away from each other.
Yeah.
We were swapping restaurant recommendations last time. Have you been to Nicola's yet?
I haven't been there yet. It got really busy. In those last couple of weeks since we chatted. And so that's definitely on the agenda for January.
And in that time, your daughter was in the Nutcracker. How did that performance go?
People said that it was going to be a big commitment, and I just had no idea, Josh. It was so much work. However, as a parent, it was one of those moments where I will remember the story and tell it back to my daughter because we really got to see her as her person when she was going to school and she still had sports and she was in the Nutcracker. It seemed the busier she was, the better she was. So it was one of the most incredible experienes of my life.
Something tells me that she takes after you in some ways.
Maybe a little.
You're watching a young entrepreneur, but it sounds like.
Yes.
How did you come into the business of storytelling?
I came into the business really realizing that I had grown up during my time in Minnesota telling stories. It was an assignment for my 5th grade English class, and I was one of those kids who discovered what I was meant to do at 11. Of course, at that point, I didn't realize the business applications, but as I continued through school, I would tell stories then in festivals, or I know you don't know that they're like storytelling festivals or open mic nights. Through my graduate research, I started studying the role of storytelling in organizational culture. Then I went into sales and marketing, and I kept realizing that even though we talk a lot about stories, and even back then it was a buzzword, no one was telling actual stories. And there was that jumping off point. You mentioned being an entrepreneur, where I decided, even though I didn't really know what it was going to look like, that was actually my job, was going to be to teach people how to leverage their stories.
Now that you say it, it has become a little bit of a buzzword, hasn't it? Storytelling. Yeah. It wasn't like as a concept, and certainly as a business aid, it wasn't really thought of, if I think back a decade or 2 ago. And certainly folks like yourself have been very instrumental in putting it on stage there. But what has been that inflection point for storytelling being kind of cast into the main stage now?
I think there were important people who started talking about it, right? Gary Vaynerchuk started mentioning storytelling, Richard Branson, Seth Godin. Like, you started to see the word pop up in modern marketing. And so it added some, social proof to the concept. And that was about the time, was the, like 2010-ish, that I started really making this my focus. And it was, at first, it was really hard. I got laughed out of, I would write to different companies and say, I'm a storytelling expert, and they would have no idea what I was talking about. And now it has become mainstream, and again, maybe to its own detriment, buzzword.
What is a story and what is a story not, or what is not a story?
And this is where it's so important, right? Because what you see then is, as people are talking about how important stories are, and the thought leaders are saying this, and then it trickles down to the people who are actually responsible for telling the stories or using stories in marketing or sales or whatever it is. The tendency is to one of the things I see happen is people preface whatever information they're going to give with, this is our story. So for example, if you're telling your company's story, someone will say, maybe it's in a sales presentation and they have a deck ready and they have the slide that says X company's story. And then they go right into, we believe in excellence. We are top-notch innovators. We never rest or sleep until we are on the precipice of the next great thing, right? But think that is not a story. Those are just words.
That's just something.
Yes, exactly. And so you just putting the word, this is our story, or that phrase, does not make something a story. Or if it's a product or a service that you're selling or sharing, it's, well, here's our story. We have X number of gigabytes and 97% customer satisfaction. And it's, you can see the bullet points on the brochure or on the slide deck or on the website or wherever they're putting it. And ultimately, when you think about what a story really is, it's when your friend tells you what happened to them on the street, or the crazy thing that happened at the airport, or if you have kids and they want a bedtime story, there's an arc to it. There are characters in the story. There's emotion in the story. And somewhere in the rise of the word story, we got confused about what really makes a story.
That to me was emotion, characters, and arc.
So yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. So I was thinking about that. I'm like, I didn't really say what it is. So Josh, one of the things that I teach, and that is very important to me, is that stories are something that anyone can do. So you don't just have to, because we often think there are some people who are naturally great at telling stories and some people who just aren't. And so I wanted to create kind of a blueprint so that anyone, particularly in business, could tell a story. So there's a framework. And in Stories That Stick, I outline the framework as 3 parts: normal, explosion, new normal. What was the situation? What was at stake? What were they feeling? What was happening? To kind of set the scene, get the person interested, draw the person who's listening or reading or whatever it is in. There's an explosion. And now that doesn't require fireworks or, mass destruction, but really it's that inflection point of change. Something's introduced, a decision is made, action is taken. And then the third part is the new normal, which is what is possible now? Who are they? What have they become? So the first part is kind of that arc that I said. I call it the framework: normal, explosion, new normal. Then the second part of the blueprint, and you can use this as a checklist of the components that a story needs to have, which are characters. Now, again, this isn't saying XYZ, we at XYZ company, like, who is we? Nobody knows who the we is. Like, we need, and a company is this esoteric, like, that's not a thing, right? It's a concept. So who is the person? Who are the people? And it sounds, and I know you might be listening to this and thinking, well, I'm not just going to talk about Susan or Carlos. Yes, talk about Susan or Carlos, right? So you need an identifiable character. Emotion.
Can I cut you off here? Because
I know I get this is my. I'm sorry. This is my soapbox. I'll just take over the whole thing.
No. I love your soapbox. And now as like the now as the company founder and consummate businessman, I need to talk about my own stuff, right?
Yes.
But what was interesting is you said, no, like name the character, right? Like give the, and my colleague and I recently decided that with our company, we focus on customer success as a core function for a lot of companies, SaaS companies out there. And we realize that what's happening right now in the world of the economy and in SaaS and SaaS, this downturn we're seeing and everything, are having a tough time, sales teams and salespeople, unfortunately, in this moment. And customer success managers who own existing customer revenues most of the time are having to step up. But they've always kind of been they've always been in the shadows of sales. And so we thought, my colleague and I, it reminded us of Rosie the Riveter, that during wartime, the women are asked to step up and show their strength. And in some ways that reminded us of, so we named our superhero, Rosie, to go through this journey as a customer success. I don't know. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's not. You can tell me.
Well, there's good. And then there's things to think about as far as that goes. But you're right, to have a person that they can think about. And I would also just add this: as sales are struggling, customer success experts, this is not only is it your time to shine by necessity, but you actually know the characters that you're working with, right? If you're trying to tell customer success stories and equip your salespeople, because they need those stories now more than ever, you're the bridge. You're the one who knows them by name. You're the one who knows what they've been through. Yeah.
When I read your book, and the reason I wanted to have you on the show is the relevance of what you talk about it's so relevant to the world of customer success. And I was thinking about different use cases where there could be huge value. How do you sell your company vision to your customers? How do you elicit stories from your customers?
Absolutely.
We know customer marketing is increasing. How do you share your own story? You always have to be advocating for yourself. And, I see that now on LinkedIn and all over the place. How do you share the story of your customers once you've elicited those stories? How does customer success share the story of their own impact, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So there were all types of different kind of applications is what I saw. And you've outlined really kind of four main types or models of stories, right? We've got the value story, the founder story, the purpose story, and the customer story. Did I get that right?
Yep, that's right.
So I'd love to kind of just go through each of those, and then we can really put that in perspective of how companies can use these stories most effectively.
Yeah, to give you a little breakdown on each one. So, and it's each one, it's kind of in the name. So the value story, those are stories that illustrate the value of what you offer. And as you said there, Josh, that's why I was so excited to come on here and talk with you and speak with your audience, because there really is it's a 360 spherical opportunity here for you to be telling stories to express value. So, typically that's the value of a product, the value of a service, the value of this company. But as you mentioned, it's the value of you and your role in customer success. I mean, there's so much value that could be communicated. That's what value stories are for. Founder story, it's right there in the name. It's the story of the founding of the company. Now, there's two ways to look at this. Of course, if you are the founder or if you know the founder, you can, and you know the story of the founder, which you should, because the founder should have told it to you. You can also tell the founder's story, even if you didn't found the company. And I would say another little tributary, what is that, river? I'm thinking about another little side story there is when you kind of like you're founding in the role that you're in, when you first discovered that this is what you wanted to do. So that's another way to look at it.
So you're saying you don't have to be necessarily the founder?
Yeah. You can, and you should always, if you aren't the founder of the company, you should always know the founding story. Why did this company start? What was the idea? And we've seen that the companies that really nail that story are the ones that have incredible, lasting success, because it becomes the foundation upon which the company, the lore, the culture, all of it, the brand is built. However, on the other side of it, you also had your own founding moment when you became an employee, when you became a partner, when you became a part of this company. So you can also, there's also an aspect of that story that I sometimes lump in there.
I think that's really important and not to be overlooked, because a lot of times I find it very effective when, let's let's stick with customer success. A new CSM will come on as my representative, to me as the client. And they'll say, oh, I used to be a client of this company as well, but I loved them so much that I made the move over.
Yep.
Or, like what triggered their decision to come join this company? And they're clearly not the founder of the company,
right,
but it is their founding story, their origin story with that company. And I always find it, I don't know, it always kind of captures my attention.
And I think that it just even as you say that, it adds so much power, because people are always asking themselves, why are you here? Why are you talking to me? And you can answer that question on such a deep, visceral level by sharing your founding story of why you're there, why you believe in it.
So we've got value story, founder story.
Yep.
What's next?
Purpose story. Purpose story is, those are the stories that are really meant to align and inspire teams, like why we do what we do. This is where, this is more typically an internal storytelling opportunity within organizations, as so many companies right now are struggling with retention. There's, employee retention. They're struggling with bringing in new talent. There's so much shifting around right now. Being able to really communicate what the company, what the brand is about, and why that matters to your team members so that they can become a part of it. That's the purpose story as kind of a genre. And you'll notice that these all, because sometimes your purpose stories also are illustrative of your value. Like, this is why we matter, because we are so committed to these specific purposes. But it was kind of an easy way to divide it up. And then finally, the customer story, which you mentioned and is so important, Josh, with this group, is what are the stories that you can curate or obtain or get your fingers on from your customers. And these are real stories. These aren't like avatar stories, or imagine you have customer ABC, like that. It's what was their normal explosion, new normal working with you.
And I've been told from folks in the industry, in the customer marketing and customer advocacy industry, shout out to Slap5, my friends over there that have a platform for this, that the less production value for those stories sometimes, like, I'm thinking of video production here, but sometimes just more like, the more lo-fi it is, the more authentic and the more it sticks for those customer stories. There
are so many different ways that you can activate your customer stories. In some cases, it might be a big, beautiful, well-produced piece. In some ways, it might just be like a comment blurb that scrolls past on your website. However, it's not just, oh, I love this company. It's, here's what we were struggling with. They found me. I've never been happier, right? It has that. It's there. You go the extra mile to pull out the normal explosion, new normal from the customer, get some of those components in there, so that it really comes to life.
Yeah. As a founder of a tech company, of a startup, and my background is in product management, and we always talk about the lean startup and launching products and getting to product market fit. But then, in my current role at UpdateAI, the concept of having a market narrative fit came up, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there's your product, sure, does that work? Does it solve a need? But then it's just like, does your narrative fit into the arena of what you're doing? I want to try to blend a couple of those story types together in telling you my story and get your feedback and really critique, if that's okay with you, Kindra.
You got it. Let's see what we can do.
So this is unedited, raw, and you're gonna like blast it back at me here. I want your candid feedback.
Okay, you asked for it. Here we go.
All right. So I haven't rehearsed this either, to my own detriment here. So I've been running UpdateAI for a little over 2 years now, about 2.5 years. And prior to that, I was working as a consultant at Boston Consulting Group. And in consulting, it's just, there's lots of communication. There's lots of presentations, lots of communication, lots of notes, all kinds of things like that. That's in many ways how consulting in that type of world can make their revenues. And we were moving really quickly, and information was getting lost from these fast moving, high performing teams. And so I said, how can I make sure that everybody stays on the same page each week in all the work that our team is doing and all that we're accomplishing? And so the very first kind of inception for UpdateAI was just that. It was like, how do we take all of the key information for the team, whether it's here's all that we've accomplished, here's all that we have to do, here's all the action items, here's the blockers, the open questions, and distill that down into like a quick update, into a quick narrative that everybody gets on the same page for. Then we started to, we jumped into this and we started interviewing and kind of understanding different functions and verticals. We realized that meetings were really kind of the central point of communication for lots of teams, especially during COVID, going into this remote working world. And then we said, okay, great, let's solve meetings. We don't want to just be a generic meeting note taker, so to speak. So we started talking to different functions about understanding what they would need. We came across customer success managers, realized that these folks were in meetings with customers every day, underappreciated and underserved in our opinion. And they had a lot to follow up on after calls with customers because accountability to the customer matters. So we said, okay, how can we help them the most? And that's where we developed our algorithm for detecting action items so that we are in calls with customer success managers, with their customers, detecting all the action items automatically for them so that nothing slips through the cracks and we can relieve some of their stress in back-to-back meetings so that they can stay focused on the customer conversation. And that's the start of our company. And there's a whole story about the vision, which to me is actually more interesting, but I'm not going to go there. I feel right now, Kindra, like I just had a really long and uninteresting monologue. So pick that apart.
Okay. So here's where, and it would take, so I'm just going to give you kind of a few things because I was taking notes. And so then I was, but here's what was great is that it was cool. Like we had, you could see it was clear why you came to this. There was a moment in there when you said that information was getting lost, but here's where things kind of fell apart. So the good news is, so that's all I can say nice about it, Josh. Okay.
Unraveled.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah. So here's where I want to go back to the 4 components. We need characters. And in this situation, you're one of the characters and we can explore whether or not we need to have another one. Because usually the narrator, the teller of the story is an inherent character and it's valuable to have another character in there. We were missing the emotion, which we can talk about, but like you said, the information was getting lost. And here's where the misconception about emotion in a story in business is that it needs to be dramatic, and it's information getting lost probably isn't super dramatic, except that it's emotional. Like why we're doing all of this work where it's frustrating for the people who are putting in the effort and they don't have, they know that they're not maximizing the work that they've done because the information is getting lost. I would imagine that there's a lot of time loss. I would imagine that there's a lot of efficiency. And these are people. These are people who are like, I'm good at there's so much good stuff here and I can't do anything with it because I'm just trying to keep track of the stuff. So even not knowing anything about except for the little that I know, I would imagine that is the emotion, and anyone that you're telling this story to, because we tell stories to audiences for reasons. And the reason you would be telling this is because they know how that feels, right? They've felt that before. And so, and you don't, you know what I mean? So
bring the emotion.
Exactly. And, and
you would not be the first person to tell me that I'm not emotive, by the way. You wouldn't be the first woman to tell me I'm not emotive.
But it doesn't, that's another, it's good that you bring that up because you don't have to cry while you're telling this story. This is very matter of fact emotion. Like this isn't right. It isn't right that it happens this way. There's a better way. And even that emotion on your part is sufficient. Okay. So then So then the last two components that are missing that we actually didn't even touch on earlier, one is a specific moment. So here's where the story right now, what we have is, and this is a perfect, not uncommon first step, Josh. So you're excited about telling a story. You're like, I'm going to tell it in more color than just, we started here. This is what we do. This is how we can help you. Right. But we did still get a chronological, first we did this, then we did this, then we did this. Then
it's
we
like
figured
my brain was kind of processing it as I was going, right? Like, it's like reading off a resume, like, oh, let me start. I was in college and my first job was this, and then there was this, and now here I am.
Exactly. So we've got an, again, that's why I say this is a great place to start. But if you think about it right now, it exists in one dimension. And so what we would do, we won't do it now, but we would lift out pieces of it that make it, and this is where you can't see this, but I'm making all these hand gestures. That's where I go a little bit mad scientist. So it's possible that we don't need to know that you were in consulting. Now we might, right? But like saying first I was in consulting and now I'm doing this, it could be more about you met up, you came across someone who was in customer success and they expressed it there, right? So it might be, we might not need to know that first you started with meetings and then you looked at functions.
Can we bend the truth, Kindra? Can we fib a little bit for the sake of the story? There's got to be some kind of gray area at some point here, right?
I would say that you never need to fib because the truth that you need is there. And so now if like details are lost, or let's say you are going to name someone, but you don't want it to be the actual person's name. You want to anonymize them a little bit, but you want to keep the essence of the person. That's perfectly okay. But what happens is we lean towards, oh, well, I'm just going to say that this happened this way. We lean towards the fib because we aren't disciplined enough to just go and think a little bit harder on the thing that could fill it in, is the actual thing that we need. And here's the other problem. If you fib in a story, your audience will remember that fib and you will have a very hard time keeping track of it because it doesn't live in you in the same way. Right. You know, you made that up. And so when you talk about like stories, for them to really work, need to be truthful. They need to be authentic. If the story starts with a lie, it's never going to reach its full potential. That's what I believe. I'm always going to say storytelling for good, but it could be entirely possible that you were the one where you were in consulting. You spent all day, every day collecting communications and you knew that it was wrong. You were feeling these feelings and you started to investigate to see if there was something that could be done about it. Now, here's where we zoom forward a little bit. Instead of saying, well, first we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this, you say, okay, it was boom, 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 boom. We said, first we decided to look where information was most getting lost, then this. It goes very, very quickly. And then that third component is a moment. And I bet there was a moment, Josh, in this linear thing that you laid out where you were talking to somebody or you figured something out, you were sitting at your desk, you were in a team meeting, whatever it was, and you were like, that's it.
And listen, there probably was, but honestly, it was probably also just like a very iterative type of path. So maybe that's where we can group it into a quote unquote moment.
Bring that up. Yeah. Build that out. Exactly. And you can zoom it in so that somebody can see it. And then loop it all the way back around where you can say, I don't know if you've ever had that feeling where you can feel the information slipping through your fingers like grains of sand, but now we can catch them. And the end, happily ever after.
Happily ever after. Kindra, this was so amazing to talk to you. Really helpful. I'm going to get to it right now and refining my story. I really believe in this stuff. I would love for everybody to read Stories That Stick. I loved it. Sherry Srebnick of Forrester loved it.
Sherry loved it.
Sherry, and if Sherry loves it, then you know it's good.
You know it's good.
And we'll have to save the rest for another time. Kindra, thank you so much for being on this episode.
Thank you, and thanks for being willing to share a raw story. That was fun. That was fun.
It was.